The morning sun cut through the store window, casting long, sharp shadows across the linoleum. It was July 4th, and the town outside was still shaking off the sleep of the holiday. Inside the convenience store, the air was cool and smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Jessica Parker stood at the counter, the silence only broken by the low hum of the refrigerated displays. She placed 2 bottles of soda on the worn plastic surface. Her wallet was already open in her hand, the leather worn from years of use. She counted out the exact change, her movements slow and deliberate. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet rhythm of a holiday morning. She watched the cashier finish a conversation with someone by the door before turning his attention to the register. The register beeped, the drawer slid open with a metallic click, and Jessica waited, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. She looked out at the parking lot, where the heat was already beginning to shimmer off the asphalt. Everything was exactly as it had been the week before, and the week before that. She reached for her items, the transaction complete, ready to walk back into a morning that promised nothing more than the day ahead. The cashier did not reach for the bags immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes dropping to the glass display filled with colorful lottery slips. He tapped his index finger against the plastic surface. "The jackpot is climbing," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. "Today feels like a lucky day, wouldn't you say?" Jessica paused, her hand hovering over her wallet. She looked at the display, then back at the cashier. It was a standard line, one she had heard a dozen times before, yet the words hung in the quiet air of the store. She reached into the billfold and pulled out a $1 bill. It was crisp, unused, and held no special significance. She slid the tillable across the caps. "Why not?" she said. The cashier pulled a single ticket from the roll, the paper thin and slightly stiff. He placed it between her soda bottles. Jessica took the ticket, her thumb brushing the textured surface of the printed numbers. She slipped it into the side pocket of her purse, the paper folding slightly against the lining. She felt the weight of it, a small, inconsequential scrap of paper that felt different than the receipt tucked beneath it. She took her items and turned toward the glass door, the ticket now a hidden presence against her hip. The midday heat hit her the moment she stepped outside. The parking lot was busier now, with cars pulling in, their trunks loaded with charcoal bags and coolers. A radio played from a nearby sedan, the rhythm of a summer pop song blending with the distant sound of tires on hot pavement. Jessica walked toward her car, the keys cool against her palm. She stopped briefly to wave at a neighbor hauling a crate of corn toward a backyard fence. The man called out a greeting, mentioning the temperature and the promise of the evening fireworks. She smiled, nodded, and kept moving. Her mind was already on the grill, the ice in the buckets, and the long afternoon of family chatter. She stowed the groceries in the passenger seat, the ticket in her purse settled and forgotten against the leather. She drove through the residential streets, watching the flags ripple on porches and the sprinklers spraying arcs of water over manicured lawns. Every house looked the same, every street corner familiar. She pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. The silence of the garage floor was a sharp contrast to the bright, noisy day. She grabbed the bags, shut the car door, and walked toward the kitchen, the ordinary weight of the afternoon pressing against her, completely unaware of the shift that waited in her pocket. The house was dim when she stepped inside. The kitchen remained exactly as she had left it, the countertops clear and the air cool. She placed the groceries away, moving with a rhythm born of habit. Outside, the sky began to deepen into a bruised purple. The first firework detonated in the distance, a low thud that rattled the window pane. Then came the whistle and the sharp crackle of light. Jessica paused by the counter. She remembered the ticket. She reached into her purse and pulled out the slip, the paper feeling unnaturally heavy under the kitchen lights. She did not head for the grill. She did not check the ice. Instead, she pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat down. The chair creaked against the tile. She pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen dark and reflective. With a thumb swipe, she unlocked it and navigated to the news application. The interface loaded with a soft chime. She placed the ticket flat on the table, smoothing out the edges with her palm. The fireworks continued, brighter now, casting shifting shadows against the walls. She tapped the screen to open the official results page. The room felt smaller, the space around her narrowing until there was only the table, the phone, and the slip of paper. She looked at the first digit on the screen. It glowed against the dark room. She looked at the ticket. The numbers matched. Her pulse skipped, a sudden sharp thud against her ribs. She took a breath, held it, and moved her gaze to the second number. It matched too. A tremor started in her thumb, and she pressed her hand flat against the table to steady it. The paper felt thin and fragile under her skin. She focused on the third digit. Her eyes darted from the phone to the ink on the ticket, back and forth, tracking the sequence. It matched. The room seemed to grow vacuum silent. Even the fireworks outside felt distant. Muffled by the intensity of her focus, she checked the fourth. The numbers aligned perfectly. Her grip tightened until the edges of the paper began to curl. She felt the blood rush to her face, a heat that had nothing to do with the summer night. The fifth digit matched. She did not blink. She did not swallow. Every muscle in her neck pulled taut as she moved to the sixth. Her vision narrowed to the final digit, the one that would break or confirm the sequence. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering, waiting for the reality of the sequence to settle. The final digit aligned. It sat there on the screen, a static character that rendered everything else in the room obsolete. Jessica stared at it for a long count, waiting for the numbers to rearrange themselves into something familiar, something that made sense. They did not. The sequence was complete. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly thin, as if the room had been pressurized. She let out a breath she had been holding for minutes, the sound sharp and ragged in the quiet house. She lowered her hand from the phone. The device felt heavy, a cold slab of glass that now contained the trajectory of her entire life. She did not reach for it again. Instead, she pushed it 2 inches away, a deliberate movement that signaled the end of the search. She stood up, the chair legs scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed deafening. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening as she braced herself. The wood was solid, grounding, yet it felt like a tether to a life that had just vanished. She leaned her weight forward, staring at the empty space where the phone lay, the gravity of the moment settling into her frame. The reality of the win was not a sudden rush, but a slow, crushing weight that settled into her chest. Jessica turned from the table and walked toward the window. Her movements were deliberate, measured, as if she were learning to navigate a room that had changed its dimensions. Outside, the town continued its rhythm. A car slowed at the corner, its headlights sweeping across the lawn. A porch light flickered and died. She watched these small, predictable events with a new, detached clarity. She did not call her mother. She did not wake the house. She stood with her forehead against the glass, the cool surface drawing the heat from her skin. The fireworks had stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt thick and heavy. She tracked the movement of the stars through the gaps in the trees. She watched the shadows stretch and retreat. The neighborhood remained fixed in its patterns, unaware of the shift that had occurred behind the pane of glass. She stood motionless, her hands clasped behind her back, letting the minutes bleed into hours. The black sky slowly bruised into a deep, muted indigo. Then, the first gray light of morning touched the rooftops. She did not look away. She watched the sun climb until the world was fully illuminated, the weight of the night settling into a cold, calculated resolve. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the first vehicle skidded to a halt at the curb. It was not a neighbor. Then came a second, a van with oversized antennas that swayed as it braked. Within minutes, the quiet street vanished under a surge of movement. Jessica was still in the kitchen when the first heavy knock rattled the front door. She walked toward the entryway, her steps steady. By the time her hand touched the lock, the porch was crowded. Microphones thrust through the air like iron rods. Camera lenses pressed against the window glass, obscuring the view with black plastic rings. The air filled with a rhythmic, pulsing sound of shutters clicking. A voice shouted from the front of the pack, demanding a reaction to the news. Another voice cut over it, asking about mansions, about sports cars, about the sudden leap into a different tax bracket. The questions hit the door in waves, a relentless, intrusive noise that vibrated through the frame. She saw faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide and searching, hungry for a soundbite. The porch groaned under the weight of the gathered crowd. Every inch of her personal space was under siege by people she had never met. They wanted a performance. They wanted a story. The shouting reached a sharp, jagged peak as a reporter lunged toward the threshold. A microphone brushed against the frame, leaving a smudge of dirt on the white paint. The crowd leaned in, their collective breath creating a humid fog against the glass. Jessica watched a man in the front row, his mouth moving in a rapid, repetitive rhythm, demanding a response that she had no intention of providing. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply reached for the heavy latch. As the metal clicked, the pressure of the crowd seemed to push harder against the wood, as if the door itself were the only thing holding back a tidal wave. She pulled the handle toward her. The transition was instantaneous. The roar of the street dropped to a dull, muffled hum, then vanished entirely as the heavy deadbolt slid into its housing. She stood in the dim light of the hallway, listening to the muffled thuds of fists against the paneling. The porch groaned, then settled. She took a step back, turned, and walked toward the kitchen. She left the world of spectacle behind, the heavy wood acting as a barrier between her life and the chaos of the outside. The silence of the house was absolute, and in that vacuum, she began to breathe again. Inside, the house felt like a fortress. Jessica moved her workspace to the dining table, clearing away the clutter to make room for stacks of legal documents and heavy, dense volumes on financial management. She opened a book, her pen hovering over a notepad as she transcribed complex clauses. The silence of the room was broken only by the sharp turn of parchment pages and the steady, rhythmic scratching of ink. Every hour, she set a timer. When it rang, she did not look at the door. She looked at her notes. She tracked the flow of assets, mapped out the structure of a trust, and verified the fine print on every brokerage form she touched. The temptation to walk to the window and check if the crowd was still there flickered in her mind, but she pushed it aside, anchoring her gaze back to the numbers. She spent nights mapping out local community projects, calculating long-term impacts rather than short-term gains. She was building a system, piece by piece, brick by brick. Her fingers traced the lines of a balance sheet, finding patterns in the chaos. She had no interest in the quick fix. She was focused on the architecture of endurance. By the time the moon hung high, the legal files were organized, the accounts were funded, and the path forward was clear. The routine was simple: a trip to the local market for supplies. Jessica stepped from her sedan, the engine ticking as it cooled. Before she reached the entrance, a shadow fell across her path. A man with a camera lunged from behind a row of parked cars, his lens snapping repeatedly. He moved into her personal space, his boots scuffing the pavement to cut off her route. Behind him, 3 more people emerged, clutching recording devices and notebooks. They formed a tight semicircle, effectively pinning her against the hood of her vehicle. The lead reporter held a microphone inches from her face, his eyes fixed on her movements. "Where's the mansion?" he barked, his voice rising above the ambient noise of the parking lot. "Why are you still driving that same car? We have tracked your accounts. You have the capital to live like royalty, yet you act like a ghost." He gestured wildly at her surroundings, his face flushed with the exertion of the pursuit. Passers-by slowed, their phones rising to capture the spectacle. The pressure mounted as more people gathered, their collective weight shifting toward the center of the circle. Jessica stood still. She did not look at the cameras. She fixed her gaze on the reporter's chest, waiting for the barrage of questions to pause, her posture rigid, her hands locked firmly at her sides. The reporter shoved the microphone closer, his breathing ragged. He was waiting for a confession of waste, a sign of excess that would validate his narrative. Jessica did not blink. She reached into her bag, the movement slow and deliberate. The crowd surged forward, cameras dipping to catch the flash of jewelry or the keys to a sports car. Instead, she pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. She held it out, not to the reporter, but toward the lens of the primary camera. It was a bank statement. The figures were clear, black ink against white paper. She stepped forward, the physical space between them vanishing. The reporter stumbled back, his shoulder hitting a parked car. Jessica pointed to the bottom line, her finger pressing firmly against the page. "I am not buying things," she said, her voice cutting through the parking lot noise with absolute precision. "I am buying the ability to choose how I spend my time." She tucked the paper back into her bag and stepped past him. The crowd parted, the weight of their scrutiny replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. She walked to her sedan, unlocked the door, and slid into the seat. She did not look back as she pulled away. leaving the reporter standing alone in the center of the pavement. The drive home was quiet. Jessica pulled into her garage and killed the engine. The silence of the house greeted her, a stark contrast to the shouting match in the parking lot. She walked to the kitchen and placed her keys on the counter, then sat. The temptation of the lottery curse was a physical weight, a constant pressure to prove her status through consumption. She opened her laptop. A dozen advertisements for luxury items flickered across the screen, each one promising a life of ease. She clicked through the settings, disabling notifications, and closed the accounts that offered credit. She picked up a stack of catalogs from the mail, their glossy pages filled with cars and watches, and dropped them directly into the recycle bin. She did not need them. She audited her monthly expenses, identifying the small leaks of capital that typically drain sudden wealth. She moved funds, tightened her budget, and set hard limits on what remained. Every action was calculated to prevent the slide into the common traps of instant riches. She checked the clock. It was late, but the house remained still. No calls, no shopping. She had successfully navigated the most dangerous phase of her transition, replacing the urge for material display with the cold, hard logic of long-term survival. Jessica pulled a worn, dog-eared copy of a book from her shelf, the spine cracked from years of study. She kept it open on the desk, its pages serving as a manual for the life she was building. Her desk was clear of clutter, save for a notepad and a calculator. She logged into a new brokerage account, her fingers moving across the keyboard with rhythmic precision. This was not a gamble. It was an engineering project. She translated the theories of Napoleon Hill into line items, allocating capital into diversified assets that prioritize sustainability over flash. She watched the screen as the first transfer cleared, the numbers updating in real time. She did not react to the scale of the digits. Instead, she adjusted her strategy, moving segments of the windfall into long-term holdings. She filled the notepad with calculations, projecting growth rates against inflation, ensuring every dollar had a purpose. There were no shortcuts here, only the steady accumulation of value through research and patience. She closed the laptop, the screen reflecting a calm, focused face. The foundation was set. She had replaced the volatility of chance with the architecture of a deliberate, enduring financial future. Jessica turned her attention to the people who anchored her life. A windfall could break a family as easily as it could build one, and she knew the statistics of sudden wealth were grim. She drafted a structure designed to protect her relatives from their own impulses. She spent 3 days at a legal office, reviewing pages of binders and tax codes. She insisted on strict stipulations. Funds would be released only for specific milestones, such as education or home ownership, rather than as lump sums. She sat in a sterile conference room, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound as she signed the final thick stack of paperwork. Each signature was a deliberate barrier, a wall of protection built to ensure the money remained a resource rather than a temptation. She watched the attorney notarize the trust documents, the heavy stamp thudding against the desk. It was done. The legal framework was rigid, unyielding, and ironclad. She left the office with a copy of the trust in a leather folder, feeling the weight of the responsibility settled. Her family remained unaware of the exact scale of the change, but their futures were now insulated against the volatility of the present. She had turned a stroke of luck into a permanent, protected legacy for those she loved. With her family provided for, Jessica turned her gaze toward the town itself. She spent her afternoons walking through neighborhoods, noting the crumbling pavement and the boarded-up windows of the public library. She did not want to just write checks. She wanted to see the impact of the investment. She walked into the community center, the air thick with dust and the smell of damp wood. The roof leaked in 3 places, staining the floorboards. She spoke to the director, asking for a list of necessary repairs and a timeline for completion. She reviewed the estimates on a clipboard, checked them against her budget, and initialed the approval. Within days, the sound of hammers and the hum of saws filled the building. She visited the site every Tuesday, watching as the walls were repainted and the structure solidified. She saw the shift in the faces of the local staff as they realized the project would actually finish. The money was moving, but the result was something more substantial, a functioning space for the town. She felt the weight of the lottery ticket finally dissipate, replaced by the utility of the work she had enabled. She was no longer just a person with a bank account. She was a catalyst for local stability. 10 years vanished into the rhythm of daily routine. Most people who hit a windfall saw their bank balances crater within half that time, fueled by impulse and the pursuit of status. Jessica tracked a different path. She sat at her desk every month, cross-referencing her ledger with current market data. The numbers did not merely stay static. They climbed, a slow and steady ascent that defied the gravity of sudden wealth. She saw the reports of others who had won alongside her, their names appearing in headlines detailing bankruptcy and chade-round statements and public fallout. She closed those tabs and returned to her own statements. Her discipline was a wall she had built around her life, and it held firm against the pressure of excess. There were no sports cars in her driveway, no changes in her daily habits that signaled a shift in status to the outside world. She watched the interest accrue, the figures on the screen proving that her initial mindset was the true source of her survival. The money had not been a finish line, but a tool she had refined over a decade. Her account stood as silent, irrefutable evidence of her patience. She had transformed a single moment of chance into a lasting foundation of security. Jessica closed the laptop. The screen went black, leaving the reflection of her quiet, orderly study. She stood, pushed the chair under the desk, and walked to the hallway. A paper calendar hung on the wall, filled with handwritten notes and scheduled commitments. She ran a finger down the list for the morning, marking the time for her volunteer meeting. She grabbed her keys from the bowl by the door and stepped outside. The driveway was empty, save for the sedan she had driven for the last 6 years. She climbed in, started the engine, and backed out onto the street. The town was moving through its morning pace, oblivious to the fact that she could have been anywhere else on the planet. That was the core of her reality. She was not bound by a commute, a boss, or the necessity of a paycheck. She turned the corner, the tires crunching against the pavement, and merged into the flow of traffic toward the community center. She watched the road ahead, a clear path defined by her own choices. There was no rush, no external pressure, and no hidden agenda. She drove with the steady hands of someone who had already secured her future, heading toward the work she had selected for herself. The road ahead stretched out, clear and familiar. Jessica kept her hands steady on the wheel, the movement of the car a physical reminder of the momentum she had maintained. Her mind drifted back to the night the numbers aligned. She remembered the weight of the ticket in her fingers, the silence of her kitchen, and the immediate shift in her perspective. It was easy to believe that the money had changed her, but she knew better. The windfall was merely a catalyst that illuminated the path she had already been preparing to walk. She had spent years reading, planning, and refining her understanding of how resources functioned. If the luck had arrived when she was unprepared, the outcome would have been vastly different. She navigated the intersection, her eyes scanning the streets with a calculated calm. The freedom she possessed today was not a gift from the lottery. It was the harvest of a harvest she had planted long before the winning ticket was ever purchased. She had built a fortress of security out of foresight and rigid habit. The car slowed as she approached the community center, and she felt the weight of her choices. She had earned her time, not by waiting for the world to offer it, but by being ready to claim it the moment the opportunity appeared. She pulled into the parking lot of the community center and cut the engine. The silence that followed was different from the silence of her kitchen years ago. This was the silence of a life being lived by design. She stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the entrance, where the sounds of voices and organized activity spilled out to meet her. She checked her watch. She was exactly on time. Inside, she took her place at the intake desk, organizing the paperwork for the afternoon program. A visitor approached, and she looked up, offering a steady, focused smile. There was no trace of the frantic energy that often follows sudden, unearned fortune. She listened to the visitor, processed the request, and moved with practiced efficiency. This was the legacy she had constructed. Not a monument of material goods, but a foundation of absolute agency. She moved through the room, checking tasks off her list, fully present in every interaction. She possessed the rare capacity to live without the fear of loss, because she had already survived the test of sudden abundance. She looked out the window at the town, then back to the work in front of her. She was free, not because of the ticket in a drawer, but because she had become the person who knew exactly what to do with the time she had claimed.